Hello, everybody. Let me share the screen. All right, folks. Yes, I just now put eyes on it to make sure I've got the right presentation pulled up here because I just hopped over suddenly from a skills lab that I was just leading. Maybe I'm seeing some of you coming back over, following me from that. All right, so today I'm talking to our Blackbaud CRM users, folks who are hosted on Blackbaud Cloud Operations or considering hosting. Some of the options that I talk about today might work beyond hosting, but that's our main focus. And also I will talk about using the OData connector, which is available for our Altru organizations as well. But not just that. I'm sure I probably have an agenda that I'm going to get to give you an idea of all that we'll be covering today. So let me introduce myself. I'm Rebecca Sundquist. I'm a senior principal strategic consultant here. I am speaking to you from Kansas City, Missouri, and I've been working with fundraising, data, and technology for 21 years. My work anniversary always comes up right at BBW days. So we will talk about Power BI and the connectors that are available inside of Power BI. We will address Blackbaud CRM's proxy user and where that's useful. It's particularly useful for the OData connection. And then we'll talk about read-only database access, which is an additional feature that's available for our cloud operations hosted environments. And I hope to have time to talk about Microsoft Fabric, because I know that is a big deal now, especially if you've been a Power BI premium capacity subscriber and got the message that premium capacity SKUs are now being transferred to a Fabric and that it will be necessary to have a Fabric SKU going forward. So we'll talk about that at the end. Stay tuned. Don't drop out on me just because I'm talking about OData first. I know OData is going to be a quick way for people to get immediate access to data for Power BI. So we're going to cover that first. Now, here's what you would need to know on this journey of getting data from your Blackbaud CRM database or Altru all the way up to the Power BI service. You're typically going to be starting in Power BI desktop and making that initial connection in one way or another. We're going to talk about what types of connections are available. And then I've got another step here labeling gateways and connections because it's important to understand whatever credentials you put into Power BI to make that connection, those credentials don't go up to the service. For security, it's necessary from Power BI to establish that connection again. And some of those connections require a data gateway. So we'll typically be starting in Power BI desktop, as I mentioned. And let's go look at what connections are available there. So when you open up the Get Data option in Power BI, you're presented with a lot of connectors on the right-hand side. We're going to talk about these four. The OData feed we'll go through first. It is also possible to use a web connector, which can access anything accessible through a URL. So that would be a, what would that be? Portique, I see your question, and I'm going to respond to that now because I am speaking specifically to Blackbaud CRM users, and the session that you've already attended on leveraging Sky API is going to be more applicable to our Razor's Edge NXT and Financial Edge NXT folks. So you might want to look for another session to fill this time, or stay tuned because it does get interesting, but we're going to get into some weeds in Fabric at the end. The web connector, use a URL to access data list service, for example, or it is even possible to tap into SOAP APIs, I think, but we're not going there at this moment. SQL Server Database, we're going to reference that with the read-only connection. Oh, here's what I needed to mention. The OData feed, the data list service options would require that proxy account. And that's what we're going to cover first. Then for our read-only access, we can use that SQL Server database connector. And the One Lake catalog, of course, opens up Lakehouse materials that might be in Microsoft Fabric. So here's what we need to know about the proxy user. It's a little bit of a tag on into this presentation, but it's necessary for that OData connection, or if you were going to try to use that data list service. I want to point out that these are relatively new in that the proxy user support for data list service started in Service Pack 36 for OData query and Service Pack 37. So you would need to be on those service packs before attempting this with OData. It's important to understand that the user who creates a proxy user is referred to as that proxy owner, but the proxy users do not automatically inherit the permissions of the owner who created them. The owner who created it. Proxy users have to be granted permissions via specific security roles. So that means if you want your proxy user to be accessing an OData link to a query, they have to have permission to access that query in Blackbaud CRM. Quick walkthrough on how to create that proxy user. This is an option available under Application Users. And after you create that proxy, you'll assign system roles on the first tab. And then on the last tab, you'll activate a personal access token. You can have up to 2 personal access tokens active at a time. The reason being that they're only active for 365 days. So as you approach the end date of one token, you'll want to bring the next token online so that you can start transferring the credentials in any reports and processes that we're relying on that proxy user. So we'll see that proxy user in action here as we talk about using an OData link. I want to point out that tomorrow, there's going to be a deeper dive, a full hour talking about using OData with Blackbaud Altru. And that's going to apply to Blackbaud CRM as well. So that's where you'll get the in-depth how-to tutorial on this. I'm going to give you the quick overview. So we're talking about making a connection through Power BI's OData feed option. You'll be able to grab that OData link from your ad hoc query, but make sure that the permissions say that your proxy user is going to have access through their role. Now in Power BI Desktop, you're selecting the OData feed option and then dropping in the URL that you copied from the OData link. And this is where you're going to use basic authentication with the proxy user's name and personal access token. And we publish up to the web, and I'm going through all of that because when you get to the service and you try to refresh your report, you get the error message that your data source is missing credentials. This is what I mentioned earlier on those stepping path, stair steps up to the Power BI service, is that the credentials you saved in desktop did not transfer to Power BI service. And so it's necessary for you to update the connection credentials now. Do that by locating your semantic model that was published with the report. You publish Power BI Desktop up to the service, a report and a semantic model are both created. Go to More Options in the settings there. And this is where under Data Source Credentials, you'll be able to enter those basic authentication again for your proxy user. And now you're ready to refresh on demand or on schedule in the Power BI service. Now, what happens in 365 days when your personal access token expires? I know that you don't want to have to go through every semantic model and update that connection. It's not necessary. In the Power BI service or Fabric, you'll find the settings wheel where you can manage connections and gateways. And under your connections, you'll find your OData connection. And the 3 dots there will let you get to the settings on that connection and update your basic authentication credentials. All right, so read-only. What is the read-only connection and how can it work for you? Well, first of all, I want you to know that today, in a very short time at 2:15 Eastern, The University of Houston is going to be presenting about connecting Blackbaud CRM to Power BI in a hosted environment. They are going to use the read-only database access, okay? So I encourage you to put that on your session or catch the replay. We'll use the SQL Server database connection in this case. And here's what you need to know about read-only database access. If you want the 30-minute overview of what to know about read-only database access, I'll be presenting that tomorrow at 1:30 Eastern in Unlock the Potential of Blackbaud CRM and read-only. This might be a really good time for me to pause and mention that we have docs available for you to download right now in Goldcast. I see the docs tab is available, and each of these little highlights that I've got here have links to those sessions. So read-only database access is very cool on your production database because it is an always-on secondary node. This means when you query the read-only database connection, you're querying a secondary node and not querying the primary node in production that's doing the work, right? So you're not interfering with production activity on your primary node. There's security involved, of course, to keep your secondary node secure. Only allow listed IPs can connect. The connection must be encrypted, and passwords are rotating on a 60-day cycle. For your non-production environment, there's an option called Read, Write, Execute User Access. Learn more at 1:30 tomorrow. All right, here are the top most common questions about using read-only. Now that I can access OLTP or BBDW and all the tables there are available, all of the views there are available, which one should I connect to? For some really good best practice, I recommend if you have a Skills Lab pass, catch the replay, because I'm sure the session's probably full now. Catch the replay tomorrow of data modeling for Power BI success. Gethin James is going to present there, and he has in the past worked with a very robust model. Now, my recommendation is that Blackbaud Data Warehouse. It's already in the SPACT and Dimension Kimball structure. It's ready for you to compose a semantic model from it. So when you're thinking about a really robust model that's going to work for multiple use cases, I recommend starting with BBDW, Blackbaud Data Warehouse, which also, of course, is extensible. Pardon. You can bring in external data to continue to build out the usefulness of that model. But if you're looking for a quick start guide, you can also use ad hoc queries. Maybe you've been using the OData method and you're finding it is slow to get the data across, or you want to connect directly. You can take those same ad hoc queries, copy their SQL, and pop them into Power BI's advanced options on that SQL Server connection, so that you're just ready to run with those ad hoc queries in Power BI with the read-only connection. So when you're opening up your SQL Server database connector, you're posed with the question, do you want to import or use direct query? Use the import connectivity to take advantage of Power BI's advanced features. What I mean is that's going to import the data into Power BI's VertiPack engine. That's what DAX is built for. That's what it runs off of, and how you're able to get some lightning fast results from the data that's stored in that engine. You can learn more at some links that are available for download. Again, if you haven't yet visited the Docs tab, go ahead and download our materials. I've also included a link to information about composite models for cases where you might want to use both import and direct query on different tables in that model, different connections there. Now, the read-only SQL Server connection requires the data gateway. So let's take a moment to talk about that. Remember that your SQL Server access through read-only is protected with an IP allow list and credentials. The data gateway from Power BI's data gateway is designed for an on-premise data connection that requires you to be essentially within your firewall to access that data. By having that data gateway installed on a machine that you control or a virtual machine, you're able to then identify the IP for allow listing to read only. And the Power BI cloud service will then speak to the data gateway, and the data gateway will do all of the credentialing and data access for Power BI. So again, this is available under the settings wheel with Manage Connections and Gateway, but now instead of being on the Connections tab, we're on that next tab, On-Premise Data Gateways, and this is where you'll be able to manage those. All right, let me check our Q&A because at this halfway point. I see Erica's question, use cases for OData versus read-only, or especially now that we can see that we can paste that SQL query. When you've got that read-only access, Erica, I default to it. I find that it is faster than waiting for OData to transfer. The other thing about Power BI and Query Editor, if you've got a query that you've pasted into Power BI, you can edit it there, which means you can start to introduce variables or parameters. You can figure out, well, what is today and how does that affect the date range of the data that I need to pull in my query, because I don't want it all to go into Power BI and then I filter it in Power BI. Let's just filter it before it gets there through my query definition. So I think read-only really opens up a lot of power for you. David, I see your question. Is there a Tableau equivalent of updating credentials for all reports? And I cannot answer that. I have struggled a little bit with Tableau Bridge, but not enough to answer that question. I see Janelle's, what are the limitations of having access to only 2 tokens at a time? No, I wouldn't say that that's a limitation in the personal access tokens, because you can use that token across multiple connections. The reason you've got those the option to have 2 instead of just 1 is so that as you're approaching the expiration, you can proactively switch your connections over to use the new token. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing the question. Microsoft Power BI on the navigator screen. Oh, yeah. So you've got a specific question there, Julie. I might have to come back to that one at the end. Thanks, Kelly. All right. Is Blackbaud? Yeah, and I responded to Pratik at the start. Okay. We're ready to move into the second phase here to talk about what do we do with Microsoft Fabric now? Is anyone playing with it? I would love to see a show of hands in the chats here. I'm gonna switch on over there and see what is the general response when I say, are we using Fabric yet? Are we ready to make the most out of Fabric capacity? So with Microsoft Fabric, thank you, Stephanie. With Microsoft Fabric, we open up so many different types of tasks. I've only selected the 3 types of tasks that go into getting a visualization in front of our users, right? But in Fabric now, we can collect data, store that data in Fabric, and then create our visualizations off of it. I mean, ultimately, it could theoretically all be done in Fabric, even without Power BI Desktop, which at the start of my presentation, I said, we're going to start in Power BI Desktop. We always start in Power BI Desktop. We'll see how much longer that stays true. I think it'll continue to be true for some time, but let's talk about storing data, first of all. We're familiar that when we publish something from Power BI Desktop, that publishes a semantic model and a report. So there's those 2 items. One is referred to as storing data task, and one's the visualization, right? It is possible to create that semantic model directly in Fabric. One reason we might want to do that is if we're storing the data in a lakehouse. Lakehouses are very cool because they use Delta Parquet tables, which track change history. And I still have much more to learn about that. But I did want to present what would a read-only connection look like in Fabric, and what other options are open to us with the concept of collecting data and using a Fabric data pipeline, for example. Spoiler alert, we're going to talk about FTP. In Blackbaud CRM, you may have some exports. Maybe you've got a process now where you're sending information over to vendors and they're doing some reporting for you. In that process, you might have autofile downloader downloading the file to Blackbaud CRM's SFTP, and then subsequently your FTP process sending that over to your vendor. We're going to talk about doing that in Fabric. Yep. But first, let's start with just a straight up connection using read-only and creating a semantic model off of that, and then subsequently you can start building that report. The data pipeline option is what we're going to cover second. All right. Dataflow Gen 2 is an activity that you can do under the collect data option. You can, so what we see here on the screen might feel kind of familiar. It looks a little bit like the get data options from Power BI Desktop, but we are in Fabric now. This is online in the browser. SQL Server database is still an option, but the key is, since this is happening online, that gateway is necessary right here, right now. Whereas previously you were able to connect to your SQL Server, a read-only connection locally, maybe because you've locally whitelisted your IP or your VPN's IP. Now, in order to even get started, you would online, you would need that gateway in place. The thing about a Dataflow Gen 2 is that it has a destination, and we're talking about Fabric capacity. We're talking about storing data in the lakehouse. So the end result of your tables that are here in your Dataflow Gen 2, they're going to be lakehouse tables. Now I'm kind of switching gears, putting a pin in that, because we'll come back and talk about the semantic model and reporting next, but we're going to put a pin in the read-only and say, well, here, what about another option? What about that SFTP option that tickled your interest just a moment ago? With a data pipeline in Microsoft Fabric, we can use an SFTP connector to copy data. So in Blackbaud CRM, if you're not familiar yet with how to access your SFTP user account information, that's under Administration and Tools, SFTP user account. You'll be able to show your username and password there. And then you can test in any other FTP tool that you're able to access that information. Once you've tested successfully, you're ready to try it out in Fabric, right? Create a new connection under Manage Connections and Gateways. Our connection type here is SFTP. We're using this server information and the user access under basic authentication to make that connection. And then I'm just giving you a little bit of a preview. Like, you're coming in here, many of you are probably not yet in Fabric. Some of you might be, and this might already be a little familiar. But if you haven't seen it yet, under the copy data activity, we're going to set our source, and our destination. Our source now is that connection that we just created on the prior screen. And then once we've set up that source and we've established our connection to the FTP, we can browse it to identify a specific output from your FTP. Then we go over to this destination, and our destination again is the lakehouse. So I hinted at that earlier, that we can put a destination into a lakehouse. And in this case, I'm choosing files rather than going straight into a lakehouse table, because it's a little bit easier to make sure I get all my data types right. You'll see in a moment my next step. So I'm going to load this into files in the lakehouse rather than tables. Files are just straight up file storage system, right? This is a CSV file. I can browse to find my file folder structure inside my lakehouse. Now we're ready to move to the transform and load phase, which I'm going to use Dataflow Gen 2 again. But now my source, instead of being read-only, is the actual set of files that we just loaded. And my destination, again, is the lakehouse, but it's going into these tables. Look at these cute little tables with the delta symbol, reminding us that they're Delta Parquet tables. Also, while we're here, we can add multiple queries. We can do this. This is Power Query Editor, but it's online. Continue, adding as many queries as we need to get the data points that that will support our semantic model. So I'm going to go ahead and create a dim date as well. This is my last slide, just to give you a quick sneak peek into and then what. In Fabric Online, you're able to build that semantic model, create relationships as you're already accustomed to doing in your Power BI Desktop's model view, and you've got full access to create calculation groups, create your measures, define all their properties as you're already accustomed to. So I'd be interested to hear, has anyone tried it yet? Is this piquing some interest? I know this was a beginner's lesson, and I selfishly kind of usurped it to turn it into talking about Fabric because I got excited within the past month leading up to BB Dev Days. I am open for feedback. I see David's question about Google Looker. So we do have folks from clients who are Google shops that are doing some presentations there. And if Dan Snyder is still on here, maybe he could drop in some session titles. Because I know that we've got some Google shops. All right, folks. I do have a presentation immediately following this one. So if there's not too much more chat, I'll be dropping off. We can also, have we launched the survey? All right, Stephanie, I see you. So I'll mention again that we've got our Power BI user groups, and that's going to be a great place for you to bring your questions or to just ask, can we see that again? Can we see that again? Because you're not the only one, Stephanie. I know that this was a lot, and it was fast, and it was not going into depth. You've got Rosita Bradham's session on OData to check out, or the University of Houston session on read-only connections that will take those deeper. All right. Thank you all.